I would like to describe a field in which little has been done, but in which an enormous amount can be done. This field is not quite the same as the others in that it will tell us little of fundamental physics, but it will tell us much about the strange phenomena that occur just below our perception. In contrast to the natural philosophers of the past, the scientists of this field delve into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. Their quest is to understand and create the imperceptible. After all, there is plenty of room at the bottom.
Hello and welcome to the Materialism Podcast, an exploration of the past, present, and future of material science. My name is Taylor Sparks. I'm a professor of material science and engineering right here in Salt Lake City at the University of Utah. I'm joined, as always, by my trusty co-host, Andrew Falkowski. Andrew, what's up?
Not much. Feeling very relaxed. I just finished my PhD proposal defense, and I passed.
End is in sight. For Andrew, the end is in sight.
Indeed. There's still a lot of work to do, but I'm thankfully feel like I have a much straighter trajectory to the end of that work than I did before. By the time this releases, who knows how long it will have been, but I'm still feeling the euphoria of getting that done and over with.
Well, we just got out of my class. I teach materials informatics here at Utah. I've taught it 4 times. I love teaching that class. Every time I teach it, it is wildly different. And this year, the major new thing that we're doing that I haven't really had to spend time on in the past is self-driving labs. It's one thing to have AI for materials coming up with new material suggestions and new ways of analyzing materials. It's another to actually go out and try and make them. And there's nobody better to do that, to describe how that's being done, than Joseph Krause. This is the CEO and co-founder of Radical AI. If you've been under a rock, I guess you haven't heard of them, but I think most people at this point know who they are. They were certainly on our podcast a year ago when we talked about bulk metallic glasses. And Radical's doing radical things with materials. They are absolutely changing the way that materials are developed, tested. Actually, you're not selling recipes. You're going to sell materials. And that's a major undertaking. So he was nice enough to come and teach our students. They got a master class on self-driving labs, and we figured we had to spill that over to the podcast and let people know a little bit about it. So, Joseph, how are you doing? What's the state of Radical AI right now?
Oh, it's so good to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. So glad to be here. So happy, Taylor, to teach in the class today. And, I always quick side note, those are my favorite moments because you get the people who are most passionate about our industry. And so they're the ones who are thinking about self-driving labs, materials informatics, automated science every day of their life. They're studying it right now. They're thinking about where they're going next to grad school or in the industry. And you can tell after the room, there's just a line of people waiting to talk about what we just talked about. My gosh, I'm so excited for it. So thanks for having me in the class, and thanks to both of you for having me on the podcast. Congrats on the PhD. You should move into self-driving labs.
Seems to be the way everyone's going. So
That's right.
So Radical AI, you guys started in 2024. It's now, at the time of recording, 2026. You're in your 3rd year. A year ago when we were chatting with you, you guys have been, outside looking in, my perspective is you've been seeing that one of the real opportunities in defense, and some of the stuff that you're working on is very relevant to defense. BMGs are one of them. But based off what we heard today, you're doing a lot of other stuff. So you've been agile. You've been adjusting to new opportunities. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so where the company is today is, the technology that we're trying to build is revolutionary in the sense that it doesn't truly exist in material science yet. We are really focused on going from discovery all the way through to manufacturing. And that's a very important concept in materials that I think in the AI for science space, not always talked about. A lot of focus on discovery, a lot of focus on what's happening in the research lab. But how do you push outside of that is really, really important. For us, we need to tie where we're pushing to customers. We are a business, and our business, as we want to build it, is selling materials. So if you're going to do that, then you need to be paying attention to customers and understanding where they are and the material problems that they have in certain aspects of their technology stack. That has led us to be agile, as you've said, where we've been through bulk metallic glasses. We're now in high entropy alloys. We're actually looking at other systems as well in certain areas that we're super excited about. And all this comes back to what we and how we describe the company, which is this flywheel is a platform. It is a platform, not that we sell, but that we use internally to shrink that timeline and cost on materials discovery and scale those things to manufacturability. That is how we think about the future of materials. And that's why we've been so agile in the markets that we've approached today.
You talk about being agile, and with things like software, that makes sense because you can rewrite your code base fairly quickly if you wanted to do some sort of pivot like that. hardware is very different. Trying to pivot from one material system to another or one use of hardware or hardware setup to another can be challenging. What has that been like?
You don't say. It's probably the hardest part of self-driving labs. And man, I will tell you, have you guys seen that Jensen quote from NVIDIA where he's like, man, if you went back in time, I wouldn't do it again. Well, I would do it again. I love what we do, but no way did we anticipate how hard it would be to build SDLs like we know today. We knew it was going to be challenging. We knew it was going to be interdisciplinary, and we knew that the hardware was going to be an important piece to custom build, for lack of a better phrase. My gosh, has that been more challenging than we anticipated. And it's really because of tool vendors. They don't come automated. We can talk about that. That's a whole problem in of itself, as well as the interconnection of what you're doing in the lab to what the AI is predicting to what property you're trying to solve. Again, this is this materials flywheel that people that, if they know the company, hear us talk about all the time. And that connection, you have to build that. And it's that piece of the hardware that is actually more challenging than the hardware itself. That has been one of the most challenging parts of Radical today, and definitely on the SDL front.
Coming from academia, sometimes we get a big, sometimes we get a big, there's an understatement. We definitely have, we have very high opinions of ourselves, and we think that, academics invent all the interesting things, they do the discovery, and then we leave the uninteresting bits to the sort of people that are going to turn it into a product. But what I saw today when you described the work that you guys have done over the last couple of years, it is so far beyond anything that academia can do. The amount of resources you've deployed, first off, are outside of what academia works with, even in the big grants. Mm-hmm. And the time scale that you do it in is staggering. There's a sort of half-life to projects coming out of academia because the PhD student is a 4-year thing, and that sort of fixes the timeline. You guys in 2 years have deployed massive innovation, not just in predictive models for new materials, but the tools for fabricating them, for managing and orchestrating a system of tools like that. I was just blown away. What's it been like to manage that coming from an academic, you were a PhD yourself? Mm-hmm. Tell me about that process of switching over to this new way of thinking about it.
This is a really good question. And it's important to the industry and the fabric of the company. We talk about culture all the time as an organization, and we like to say that we're crazy about our culture. We are hard charging, we are first principled, and we are not afraid to fail. We push to extremes in everything that we do so that we can find the truth and then actually make the innovation happen. It's actually that repetition, that ability, and not being afraid to fail that allows us to drive this. So what you just mentioned has been almost a defining moment for the company. When we started building SDLs, every tool that we bought came with new problems. Every tool we need to integrate needed a custom SDK or APIs within their existing SDK, whatever it might be. The back-end operating system, we had to build from scratch because the ones that were open source weren't really productionized, right? They were done at an academic level. And that speed is imperative to the industry because it shows how rapid the change can happen. Materials already have a problem of being a long industry. It takes decades to discover a new material. You can't then come up with a new solution to solve the decades problem. That takes decades. You need to move faster than that. And, speed is our name of the game. Every person that joins the company, they need to ship something on the end of their first day or they're not going to make it. That is a requirement for the organization. And I talk about culture because that then breeds into the way that we can do work. We get a benefit that we don't need to write a thesis on it. We don't even need to worry if it's perfect up front. A lot of our V0s are not perfect at all. They're quite fragmented and or broken. It's that stepping stone that allows us to get the whole piece together. And given that we are a private enterprise, we can move fast and deploy capital, both in tooling, but also in talent, in the team that we build to solve those problems. And that's where the speed has been so effective for us. And I can't highlight the importance of speed enough.
Yeah, I've known a few of the people you've hired. If you're hiring that caliber of people, no wonder you can innovate fast. Do you have any examples of where moving fast has led to breaking something, where you learned a hard lesson but it was necessary just to have the speed?
I thought you guys wanted to keep this in a couple 45 minutes. That'll take a long time. So there are so many, but a perfect example is when we went to automate 2 tools in the lab. And I can tell you what the tools are. I'll leave the vendors out because we still work with them and they're going to get mad at me. The SEM and the XRD specifically. And so these tools, they come with modern software, right? Like, of course, they have a computer, a monitor, running the tool, showing you the data, analyzing the data. Cannot pull the data off the tool. Not accessible. Nope. No, we were so mind blown by this fact. We thought for sure we were incorrect. I think I actually yelled at the software team, and then they were like, dude, we can't get access to the tool. We actually don't have that. This is a perfect example where we built an entire V1 of the operating system anticipating some of those tools would have that technology. They did not. Set timelines back. If you remember last time we spoke, we wanted to be at 100 alloys per day by the end of 25. Now we're getting close to that number, but we're not there yet. That's one of the setbacks. That just moving fast and breaking things. We did not know in the first 3 months to look at every piece of the software stack from the equipment vendors we're buying from today. And so that's a perfect example of an easy one that we just fumbled on and then moved quickly on. If you want to go more in the science, we have needed more time than originally thought to replicate what humans can do. The human brain is quite impressive. It's incredible, actually. And really with what you can analyze, the intuition that you can build as a scientist. We call this scientific intuition at the company. And this is, put simply, experience. By running experiments, which we've all done in PhD programs, I know what direction to go in. I know what to not do. I even know to not breathe on a precursor because I might contaminate, right? Even the simple things. When you're building an automated system, it does not
You take those for granted,
Correct.
though, don't you?
Exactly right. It does not know that. You must teach it that it cannot do that. And that is not impossible. It was just something that I think we do much more today than we originally did when we started building the lab. We call this intuition metric. And now we have human scientists that annotate all of the characterization results, just like you would in a normal lab. And then we compare those annotations to the way the AI is analyzing those results and see where the delta is. That's how we can build that scientific intuition.
So maybe this is a good spot to talk a little bit about the overall framework of radical AI and what your system and proposal looks like, and whatever details you can share.
From the platform and the flywheel perspective and discovery, or the business model side as well?
The discovery side.
Sure. So the discovery side is hard because for commercial companies, discovery means two things. Yes, it is the fundamental discovery. So you're making a new high entropy alloy, that does not exist yet in the world today. Okay, that's the scientific discovery. But then for us, we want to commercialize said alloy. And so then you need to start thinking about, well, what industry? And then when you get into the industry, what part or what product? And then from that, what manufacturing process are you going to use that can make that part? How is that going to change your properties? That feels very removed from discovery. It is not at all. One of the reasons it takes so long to scale things is that we don't consider manufacturing properties or the changes they drive in discovery systems. And I can give you a real example of this. In alloys, the microstructure is what really is a huge determining factor of the properties that we see. Well, that microstructure changes at small scale to very large scale. And then all of a sudden, what was really strong oxidation performance or really strong ductility or strength now changes as you move to a different manufacturing technique. That is hard. And so this flywheel, this discovery part of the flywheel, has had to expand outside of just scientific discovery. And it still does that. We still do that. But start to consider the other elements that go into the IP that is a novel material.
That seems like a pretty big challenge because you talk about the difficulties of being agile and being able to move quickly on the lab scale, but all of a sudden you get to the industrial scale and it's even harder to pivot.
Yes, it is. And the manufacturing techniques are old. They're decades.
These are not modular. They're not reconfigurable.
Correct.
They are set.
They are set. And by the way, they're old school from the way they operate. We have talked to large material companies and said, how much data do you capture? Where does your data sit?
It's terrible.
None. We don't. Do you mean for quality control? No, we do not mean for quality control. And so
you're putting sensors on everything.
Exactly.
In a lot
sensors on everything.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, they have a software suite and they don't want to change it because it works. And the risks to their consistent customers that have something breaking is terrifying to them.
Correct.
But you're right. There's all sorts of silly things where it's you have to buy a separate package to extract the data from a furnace. It's no. I should just be able to pull whatever I want out of this.
Exactly. And if you think about it, and this gets a little bit out of this SDL piece into the business of materials, but those manufacturing facilities, they're investments for those companies, right? They're on the balance sheet of needing to drive a return on the business model side. That is a way different environment when you're thinking about, hey, let me come in and delete everything that you've done or alter everything that you've done and make it fully automated. No, we're not risking the investment of hundreds of millions that we've put in that needs to return billions over the next decade to shareholders and to what the company does. So, they don't just build facilities to make the things. Of course they do that. But those things are real investments on their balance sheet that are quite hard to convince them to move off of. This is classic innovator's dilemma.
So Joseph, one of the things I'm seeing in this class, for the first time this year, I put together a spreadsheet of all the companies doing AI for materials that have collected VC monies. First off, I was blown away. In the neighborhood of, say, $1.5 billion that's been invested, depending on how you categorize some of these. But anyways, it's a lot of money. It's rivaling like what federal investment is doing in this space, which on one hand is awesome. I'm psyched that it's a new revenue stream for funding research into new materials, which I really think is going to change the world. I'm additionally psyched because it means that companies like you have the ability to operate differently than academia does, and I think that it's going to be successful for you. But I wonder from your perspective, have you got like a come on in the water's fine like sort of attitude? Are you worried about competition in this space of a bunch of people? From the outside looking in, it seems like you guys are all playing nice and that you're not competing for the same domains yet.
Sure.
It looks like you've got your catalysis people, you've got your structural people. Yeah. I'm curious what you think, what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, so I'll give you the authentic answer. I'm a very straightforward person. For me personally, I don't give a crap about competition.
You're going to beat them.
I'm going to beat them. The way I view it is if you're going to operate in my space, best of luck, because I'm going to run you over. And if I miss you on the way going forward, I'm going to hit you when I back up. That's the way you have to operate in my role. And I just think it's really important to have that tenacity. With that said, I actually think it's very good for science. When we started the company, if you can believe this, 2 years ago, when we pitched SDLs, we were called crazy, waste of money, too CapEx intensive. The robotics will never get there. They'll drive zero value to AI materials. That is actually what we heard. Now, the world is building SDLs, and that's great because the ecosystem gets better, there's better talent. The tool vendors no longer make us build custom SDKs for all the stuff that we want to use. But we have a technical moat in that we've been doing this for a long time. And we know a lot of people are going to go try to build an SDL, and they're going to run into a lot of the similar things that we ran into. And we're already collecting experimental data, and that technical moat will continue to grow as we move forward.
Yeah, let's talk about that moat. I saw your post on, I don't know if it's LinkedIn or Twitter, but you were talking about this. And correct me if I'm getting it wrong, but you were basically saying like the moat is your ability to do in-context learning.
Correct.
Tell me what that means to you, what that means to people listening.
Absolutely. That's a really important question. So in material science, particularly in AI for science, most of the models have been trained on computational data only. There's things like DFT, et cetera. And the problem with that, and we have proof internally in the company, I can show you guys after. Sorry to everyone listening, you're not going to get to see it. But on that in-context learning, the non-in-context learning being very random. The AI comes up with an experiment, starts to optimize on a property, and then in the next iteration goes way off that optimization, just does something really random. And you're like, well, why would you do that? And it's because it's randomly pulling a big search space and trying to just continue to go with no feedback loop. No human scientist operates that way. You would never make a material, run characterization, never look at it, and update what you're going to do. You're going to go look at your SEM and your XRD and your XRD. So when you come to the in-context learning, the second we apply in-context learning, over 20 experiments, we optimize directly to the property almost every time. And now we can do that across multiple properties, up to 10 properties simultaneously. It's very important for the commercialization aspect, and I can talk about that. There's an important underlying technology inside of this, and we put this out publicly. This is available on archive called Matrix, which is the model's ability to look at experimental results.
Which is not just text, right?
Which is not just text. And when you think about what a human scientist does, it is the analysis of XRD, of XRF, of SEM, of EDS or EBSD, or whatever other characterization technique you might be using in your field. And the technologies that have been built today do not allow the pulling of information from that data. Yeah, you might be able to kind of study the patterns you see, but that doesn't teach you the underlying physics. You could understand that alloys can crack in a microstructure, but how do you understand crack propagation? And how do you predict crack propagation based on the phases that you're actually going to have in that microstructure? That is what Matrix allows. And our in-context learning engine does this today. This is why it is so impactful when we turn it on, how we can optimize on a property so quickly.
I saw this paper. It's on archive right now. Have you released the model?
Model, we've released the benchmark and the training data set on Hugging Face, not the model. And we have proprietary data that is not in that data set as well that we've also kept in-house. But the benchmark and the training data set are both available on Hugging Face. And what's so cool about Matrix, we're actually seeing results outside of just material science. We are actually seeing these language models have the ability to do better text reasoning in science because it's learning from the images or XRD, whatever non-text data you're pulling in. It is incredible. And this is a small data set. We are trying to pump out a lot more data and expand this, but this is an area where in-context learning is going to be, we think, the holy grail of material science and SDLs. This is the thesis on why everyone is moving to SDLs.
I believe it. And so what does that mean for foundation models? Because there's been so much talk about foundation models and materials. Heck, we just did an episode not that long ago on like catalysis where Meta cranked out millions of DFT calculations. And then when they and God bless them for trying it and being honest about reporting it. But when they tried to translate that DFT calculation, learning and knowledge to guiding experiments, basically, as I understood, like the OCX 24 paper was like, it didn't really improve it all that much, which tells me that my gut is telling me to be skeptical about foundation models for materials.
Yeah, and you have to have a mixture of experts-based approach where you're pulling in different models so that you can pull in your images, for example. I'll use the simplest analogy in the world. I think it's a great analogy. What the state of AI for materials today is, I'm going to bake a cake, right? I have all these ingredients and I have all this, these books in front of me that I can learn how to bake, but I'm never going to bake it. I'm just going to look at recipes that seem to be perfect and they make a perfectly baked cake. But what happens if your oven's different than mine? What happens if the salt brand is a little bit different and actually causes a different, the recipe to be a little bit different than you made it? Where do you learn that? That's the problem with simulation. Simulation is exactly what it sounds like. It is an approximation, particularly DFT, of electrons and what compositions are going to be stable. That is not the real world in material science. Real world is actually synthesizing, characterizing, and then testing the properties and confirming that information back with what that prediction was. Just like if you bake a cake, you're going to want to cut into it before you give it to your mom, and it's one of the worst cakes she's ever eaten.
So in this case, I didn't have a chance to look over your Matrix paper. Is this an instance where you're attempting to build and train one of these language models from scratch, or are you fine-tuning from existing open models?
Fine-tuning from existing open models, as well as using proprietary models, meaning that we pay for from the big companies as well. We don't want to build a language model from scratch. That is not in our domain.
That's a lot of work.
That's not in our domain, and we don't need to. Like they're so good today that we can just fine-tune on top of them and move forward. There are some areas where we do need to build, like the vision language model, the VLM that we put out. That doesn't really exist for science yet today. That was why we prioritized our work there. Something like diffusion as well. So diffusion has gotten like a lot of hype in material science, the ability to take a latent space and do composition prediction from that. We're excited by that. We do work on that. But I think that's where the industry is going to move, not to custom build language models. I think you can get enough performance by fine-tuning them.
Did you see DiffSim that came out 2 weeks ago?
This
is MIT, is Rafa and company. It was for MOFs or something. Okay. I think it was MOFs. It's using diffusion to generate recipes, which I had not seen before. I'd seen them for crystal structure. Heck, we've done some of that.
Yep.
It's a cool new approach to it, I think.
Like kind of replacing Bayesian?
Well, sort of. It's generating recipes, right? So it's not like doing next candidate like Bayesian with active learning. They're trying to one-shot it, I think, with these. I mean, obviously you would pair it with an active learning, I think. But using it as a tool to generate conditions for actually fabricating things using diffusion was a new one for me.
That's very cool.
Very interesting.
Check it out.
There was an early paper where someone used diffusion to diffuse the weights of a neural net.
Oh, interesting.
So if you had an existing neural net where you had some training data for that, you could diffuse what the weights were ahead of actually doing it. And I mean, it didn't work super well, but it worked better than you would expect.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's a lot of interesting work in that space. So one question I have, with the advent of AI systems that seem to know materials and be able to optimize them in many ways better than scientists who have decades of experience, what should students be focusing on in school? Do the fundamentals really still matter for guiding and being able to correct those? Or are there better things that we should be devoting our time towards?
That's a really good question. It's so different than when I was in school, even a couple years later. Look, I'll give an answer that I think is the truth. I think just like in software, you're seeing actually an adoption of agentic engineering or vibe coding or whatever you want to, your word for it. Meaning, no longer do you knock or mark against the software engineer for using those tools. If anything, they're expected to use those tools, move faster, ship more systems. I think the same will be true for material science. I think we'll move to a place where you don't need to be perfect at weighing out samples or even perfect at running DFT or even perfect at doing characterization analysis. I think the human will be a part of the loop and be able to concurrently run multiple experimental campaigns at a time. I always like to use the analogy in science today, you have 10 scientists focused on one problem. With A labs, you can have one scientist focused on 10 problems at a time. I think that's the way the world's going to move. And so if you're a student, I would pay attention to where machine learning is and what is it doing for you. I don't think you need to study machine learning if you want to be a material scientist. You can choose that path and go the computational route. You can also go the experimental route, understand where machine learning can give you a better screening mechanism so you can make better candidates when you get to the experimental lab. I would pay attention to machine learning, and I'd pay attention to robotics and automation. How are labs going to change? How can you be a good prompt engineer of the labs of the future? And I think that's what great scientists will turn into.
Do you think having experience improves your ability to prompt and plan experiments? Because in some sense, to know what a good robotic sample weigher machine looks like, you have to weigh a bunch of samples.
Yes, but I would challenge and say, like any good industry, there is a point in time when no one knows it, and they do figure it out. And it takes long time, so time is a variable, or high cost. Usually one of those two factors to rise to the level of knowledge, like someone who's already done it. I think there could be a world where you even need to worry less about the integration of the SDL and worry just about the outputs and the driving of the AI scientist in the middle. If my AI scientist can run XRD flawlessly for 5 months straight, do I need to worry about how to integrate XRD? Do I even need to worry about how it's running XRD? Probably not. I think that'll take years to proliferate, but I do think we'll reach a place where scientists will be good at hypothesis generation and the revolution or rotation of that hypothesis many, many times over and over, which is what the self-driving lab provides.
I guess I wonder, just to kind of play in this space, to what extent is some of this fundamental knowledge not necessarily leaning on AI for that knowledge and this fundamental experience necessary for good hypothesis generation?
I think today it's imperative. How can you generate intuition like we talked about earlier if you've never had intuition on your own? That must be captured. I think the world I'm referring to is after a lot of intuition has been captured, can you immediately learn from that intuition? A perfect example is if you comp that to coding. I don't need to learn how to build databases or a security layer or a front end. I just need to know what those components are, and Claude Code or Codex can build those components for me today. I should understand how they work. I can make sure it's not sloppy and crappy if I understand how to build them. But I don't really need to know the tools or what to write to build that. But that's what the intuition already captured, right? We've been building software for 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it is. And those models are trained on a massive amount of GitHub repos, teaching it what software looks like. We are nowhere even close to that in the experimental data. I mean, I don't even think we're not even in the same stratosphere yet of what that is. So again, while that could become true, I think this intuition is important for today. We have to continue to build up that repertoire, just like you have to build up GitHub repos so that you can train a model on how to code.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue as well. There's a lot of emphasis on machine learning, or at least there has been. But now there's people starting to talk about machine unlearning, or how do we learn from mistakes, which pulling things from the literature or just doing computational models might not teach you.
Yep, this is one of the areas that we always talk about, because I always like to say when I was a PhD scientist, 90% of the things I did didn't work. Maybe 99, but that might have just been a Joseph error on top of that one there. And really, that is what intuition really comes from, right? Yes, you learn from what works. That's usually what makes it into publication. We read publications to see where a field's moving. But I've never seen a publication, read a publication that did not have months of work behind it. So clearly there is something in the process to get to the result, as anything typically entails in science. Being able to capture those negative results is how to understand where to move in the search space next, in my opinion. If you understand the temperature ranges, the pressure ranges, the concentrations, even the environments that you're making samples in, oxidation or humidity or things that might affect your precursor, then you can really dial in on how to perfect and have repeatability in your process. And if you never look at the negative results, then you'll have a repeatability problem, as we have seen when people try to repeat one-off publications that aren't repeatable and or have different conditions that you just can't replicate in your own lab. So I do think the negative results are so important from a scientific perspective. The other side's data. If 90% of the things that you do don't work, and we don't have experimental data sets in material science, you must capture the negative results. That is arguably the most important data set that is not being captured in materials yet today. I think that's a very important piece as well from the machine learning data side.
So let me jump back to the tools that you're developing. Something we saw today, which I think is so neat, I had never thought of it this way. It was a paradigm change for me, was you have an agent which is interpreting, you talk about matrix, like there's all these different modalities of data. There's images, there's diffraction patterns, there's whatever, right? So it's learning from those, and ultimately it's condensing its learning into blocks of text. And if you would have asked me before today, like, how do you then do active learning based off of this fuzzy language, I would have had no idea. But you'd mentioned something that you're now implementing language-based embeddings, right? So you're using LLMs to create embeddings on these blocks of text and then using that in the Bayesian cycle. That is such a cool idea. Tell us about it a little bit more and how it's working. What was the path, the sort of history there?
Yeah, this is a really cool work, and it's available on their website if you want to read more about it. And I'll go back to the same analogy for simplicity for users, where I think what Bayesian has struggled with is it's very cheap and a very good way to come up with a lot of different experiments.
For design of experiments, great. Like the parameters are set.
Exactly.
It's obvious how to use it.
Exactly.
It's not obvious how to use it when you're describing these fuzzy descriptions of the nitty-gritty bits of material science.
And you don't have any information on like what those fuzzy things are and how you can manipulate them. Like put simply, yes, you can randomly guess at I should put 20 weight % of titanium in my alloy. But what does that mean? Like why? Where are you getting that from? Is it correlated to a property? Is it correlated to something you're going to do in synthesis? That really hasn't historically been there in Bayesian. These embeddings actually allow you to do that. It's like taking an encyclopedia of cooking and giving the baker this encyclopedia. So now when it's thinking about what, salt content or what other, sugar content to put in this cake, it knows what every other baker in the history of baking has ever done. It gives it a better baseline of what to tie to. And you can actually kind of have better Bayesian optimization where it's not random, for lack of a better word. It is tailored to the knowledge space that already exists today.
When you published that paper, you've got some preprint out. What's the case study you did it on?
Composition generation for us, which is really important. That's in our design of experiments loop. And this is where we're looking at things like LLMs for composition generation and diffusion for composition generation. We have more work coming out that we'll get to about later.
Yeah, can't wait.
Let's see. Anything you want to discuss that we haven't discussed already? Anything you're itching to share?
I think it's really important for people to understand what has plagued materials from the startup perspective. You talked about all these companies moving into the space. A lot of them want to sell software or license materials as their only business model. And I would say that what SDLs allow us to do and what we want to do as an organization is take that technology through to manufacturing. This is very important. This is not just about, oh, that's a good business model, we want to sell materials. It partly is because of that. We think that's what is needed in the industry today. It's also about the ability to connect that manufacturing process to discovery. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. When you generate a new material, you do informatics alone. That is not what a customer typically wants. As a matter of fact, most customers probably have a resemblance of that already internally or work with a third party to provide that. What they really ask us for is a new material. send me a new material and the
Qualified.
corresponding results from properties so I can think about putting it on my system. That is the question we get asked. We do not get asked, of the search space of high entropy alloys, what do you think is interesting? We've never been asked that question. We do not get asked, can you predict 10,000 new high entropy alloys that have never been predicted today? We do not get asked that question. We get asked, hey, the things you made, will they withstand 4,000 degrees Celsius? Yes or no? What's the tensile test result? What does the stress strain curve look like? Are they ductile? Those are the questions that we get asked. And the second you start to understand those properties, you bump into the need to think about manufacturability, about regarding what we were talking about earlier.
How much do you guys think about manufacturability right now? Because you guys are doing, outside looking in, you're in the discovery phase. How much are you guys already planning ahead of time for manufacturing? And are you worried that like you'll go down a road and make investments that are hard to undo? Like let's say you got to change it and you've poured serious money and time and effort into that. Like, I don't know, like what you're building now is like generalizable. These are tools that you're going to use no matter what. And your tools and the approach you built are going to work no matter what you work on next. But if you specialize in fabricating, manufacturing, are you worried about going down the wrong road?
I mean, you always think about it.
Life is risk, I get it.
Yeah, exactly. I think we do think about that, and we're very calculated about the decisions that we have to make. And you run into a battle, which I'm fine publicly sharing, of this vertical versus horizontal challenge. Horizontally meaning staying in discovery, moving to other systems. Vertical meaning going all the way to manufacturing in one. Unfortunately, you need to do both if you want to build a materials company in the future.
Why not part? Yeah, it's because you want to build a materials company. If you were just going to license it and have somebody else do it, that would be an option, I guess.
It's an option.
You don't want to do that.
No, two core problems. Number one, all the IP in a material is how to manufacture it. You know, if you go to the big material companies, a majority of the IP is trade secret on how you make it at the largest scale for the cheapest cost. Yes, they file patents on the composition and all of that. You can reverse engineer that, but it's all about
how you make it.
Exactly right. And so that's the first thing. So you really don't have all the value. The value sits with the person who manufactures. Number two, they won't give you the data. I've asked them. Data is gold for us, as I've talked about today. So if we can't get the data, we actually have thoughts internally that forget commercialization. Very important. But the data is a separate area that is equally as important in going to manufacturability. And I mean literally capturing that microstructure at 20,000 pounds and relating it back to what you discovered at 200 grams. That is equally as important as, we can sell alloys at 20,000 pounds. Both needed, both part of the business model, both part of this technical moat that we're building, but don't exist exactly one and the same. One is for data and one is for commercialization.
So we're starting year 3 at Radical. Mm-hmm. You've demonstrated a materials discovery process and pipeline, which is honestly very, very impressive. You've got some hits. Are we going to see in the next year the actual fabrication then? Is that like the timeline, or what should people expect?
We're going to try. That's the honest answer. We think yes. There are some things out of our control and industry hurdles. You know, one negative about aerospace is the qualification and slowness. You're going
to give Andrew nightmares. He knows all about this.
So qualification, right? And one of the things we like to talk about, we actually spend a lot of time educating aerospace companies on what is called concurrent engineering. It was invented by Charles Kuhlman from SpaceX. He did Quest Tech back in the day, sold that to Apple, and then left and runs materials at Tesla and SpaceX now. Phenomenal material scientist and innovator. And he had this idea that we use materials of the past because they don't move as fast as the engineering culture of like aerospace, like when we're building a rocket. And so what SpaceX realized was if we vertically integrate, we don't need to use materials of the past. We can concurrently engineer our materials right alongside our aerospace components, whether that's the structure or the Raptor 3, whatever it might be. And they've done this successfully. You know, Elon's tweeted about this SX500 that has this new alloy they made internally. So what we spend time on with qualification is thinking about concurrent engineering breaks the mold of qualification. You qualify because you are so unsure that what I tell you is new from the lab is actually going to be at scale in a foreseeable timeline that you can actually put into a product. I'm not betting my entire jet turbine on a maybe over the next 15 years. I need to send a new turbine in the next 6 months. Materials are out when that's the case. But if you can design materials in 6 months, as you guys have seen today, you can, Then you start to actually enable materials to keep up with aerospace or design engineering. Now you can go back and forth and you can actually push materials based on design requirements and push design requirements based on materials. That is the holy grail of material science. That will take time to get to. I don't know if we'll get to that this year, but we have alloys that we are looking to put into market.
That we're talking about it all. That it's even in the realm of possibility is wild.
Agreed. It is that this technology.
This is not your grandpa's material science approach. Like this is a new world.
This is where when they say AI in the physical world is going to have the impact, this is why we think it is so big. We think this can be one of the most important companies in the world. There are very few companies that can say we touch every single market on Earth. Whether you care about rockets, care about cars, care about energy, or you care about Lululemon workout clothes, every single one requires novel material science. If you can solve and capture the intuition and knowledge and build AGI for materials, the market cap of that opportunity is probably one of the largest market caps in the world.
That's a good place to leave it. Joseph, what a gift that you came out and spent some time with us. My students are lucky to learn from the bleeding edge of what's happening in self-driving labs. I can't wait to see what you guys do next. Thanks for sharing. You've released some awesome open source things. Sounds like more to come. You don't have to do that. And that's like it's more than just a gesture of goodwill to the community. Like it's impressive that you've done that. Just can't wait to see what you guys do next. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was amazing to be here, see what you guys are building and the culture here. And man, it gets me excited. The future talent that's going to come up in our field is very bright and they're plugged into the right things early. I'd do anything to have this back when I was in grad school. So congrats to you.
Killer. Thanks, man. We'll talk to you later.
Hey, we want to remind our listeners that today's episode is sponsored by Momentum Transfer. I've said it before, but having access to synchrotron data for powder X-ray diffraction is an absolute game changer. The resolution and intensity allows you to access information about your materials that are just not accessible with lab X-ray. And now with this company, you can get access to that synchrotron data without time-consuming proposals, waiting for them to get approved, sending somebody to go actually do the measurements. It's an absolute game changer. I love their business model. I hope you'll take advantage of it. And they've made it possible. In fact, if you go to momentum-transfer.com and you sign up, then you'll be able to get total scattering and PXRD measurements for 5 samples for free. You just can't beat that. So check them out.
The Materialism podcast is also sponsored by Materials Today. You can visit materialstoday.com to stay up to date on the latest happenings in the material science field and read some of the fantastic articles that they've published. You can also head over to elsevier.com to find out more about their journals, books, conferences, and related programs.
And then lastly, thanks to the people that make the music for the show. Thanks for the listeners who reach out and suggest episodes. You can get a hold of us. We are materialism.podcast@gmail.com. or the @materialism.podcast on Instagram, or pretty much wherever else. We would love to hear what you want to hear next, so drop a comment, whether this is on Spotify or on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this. Leave a comment. I try and get to all of those. Send us a message on Instagram. We try and respond to everything because we appreciate our listeners. We love that you're out there. And with that said, we will wrap it up. See you, everybody.
The inventors of fire, electricity, magnetism, iron, lead, glass, silk, cotton, the makers of tools, the captors of lightning, the architect, the engineer, the musician, are all beneficiaries of the materials of this world and are bound only by their imaginations in manipulating those materials.